In the golden haze of a Chicago autumn evening, where the wind off Lake Michigan carried whispers of change, Ethan Carter sat alone at a corner table in the Ivy Room. At 38, he was the epitome of American success, a white tech billionaire whose cybersecurity empire had made him untouchable in boardrooms from Silicon Valley to the Loop. His sharp green eyes scanned the room with the precision of a man who had coded his way to fortune, and his tailored navy suit custom from Savile Row hugged his frame like a second skin. But tonight, beneath the soft glow of pendant lights and the gentle clink of crystal wine glasses, those eyes held a flicker of something rarer vulnerability. Ethan's smartwatch buzzed softly against his wrist. 7:15 p.m. 15 minutes past the hour. His blind date was late. A muscle in his jaw tightened the way it always did when the world dared to disrupt his meticulously ordered life. He hated lateness, not for the inefficiency, though, that grated on his engineer's soul, but for what it unearthed, like a buried artifact from a life he'd long since armored against. It took him back to those endless evenings in his childhood home, on the outskirts of Evanston, a modest ranch-style house where the screen door creaked like a broken promise. He'd sit on the front stoop backpack, heavy with ungraded homework, waiting for his father. The man who built bridges for the city, but couldn't cross the one back home. Minutes stretched into hours, and the streetlights would flicker on, casting long shadows that swallowed little Ethan's hope. Just a little longer, he'd whisper to the fireflies, inventing stories of traffic jams and surprise detours. But the truth was simpler, sadder forgotten. By 8, Ethan's mother would call him in her voice steady, but her eyes rimmed red, and they'd share silent bowls of Campbell's soup under the hum of the kitchen fluorescents. That was love. He'd learned young, reliable, but laced with absence. Now, decades later, Ethan had built an empire to banish that ache. Algorithms that predicted threats before they materialized. Firewalls impenetrable as his own heart. Yet here he was on a whim from his assistant Sarah, a no-nonsense Midwesterner, who'd cornered him in his corner office that morning with a mischievous glint. "You need this, boss. Trust me. Amara J., 35, works in books and dreams big. App set it up. Just go." He'd scoffed, but the loneliness had been gnawing lately, sharper than usual. At 38, his social calendar was a graveyard of galas and golf outings, with men who spoke in stock tickers. Women came and went, drawn to the glow of his wealth like moths, but none lingered. None saw the boy still waiting on that stoop. He glanced at his phone again. No new messages. The screen's blue light reflected in his eyes, cold and unyielding. The Ivy Room buzzed around him. Couples leaning into candlelit whispers, a jazz trio in the corner, weaving saxophones through the air like threads of forgotten romance. Ethan had chosen this place for its discretion. Velvet banquette's walls, lined with ivy-twined bookshelves, a menu that whispered old money. It was the kind of spot where secrets felt safe. Or so he'd thought. What Ethan didn't know, what would have unraveled him if he had, was that this wasn't some algorithmic match from a dating app's cold calculus. No, this blind date was the handiwork of a quiet force far more human, Ms. Elena Harper Zoe's preschool teacher at the Willow Creek Early Learning Center in Englewood. Elena was 62, a silver-haired widow, with laugh lines etched deep from decades of wrangling tiny humans, and even tinier heartbreaks. She'd spotted Ethan's name on a donor plaque at last spring's charity gala for underfunded schools. His foundation had quietly wired a 6-figure check after hearing her pitch on urban education gaps. "You're more than your spreadsheets, Mr. Carter," she'd told him then, her hazel eyes locking onto his, with the unflinching warmth of someone who'd buried a husband too soon and raised 2 daughters through lean years. Ethan had brushed it off with a polite nod, but Elena saw the flicker, the same guarded loneliness she glimpsed in Amara Johnson. During parent-teacher conferences, Amara, a 35-year-old black single mother with skin like polished mahogany and a laugh that could coax blooms from concrete, had become Elena's quiet favorite. Widowed young after her husband's sudden heart attack left her raising 4-year-old Zoe alone. Amara juggled shifts at a Southside bookstore and a neighborhood diner, her days a tapestry of story hours and spilled coffee. In those conference room chats over lukewarm vending machine tea, Amara's stories spilled out, not complaints, but confessions laced with grace. Zoe's my anchor, Ms. Harper, but some nights when she's asleep and the apartment's too still, I wonder if there's room for more. Elena, who'd lost her own spark after her husband's passing at 55, felt a kinship. Both women knew the weight of loving fiercely while the world moved on without you. And Ethan. He was the puzzle piece Elena couldn't ignore. Loneliness recognized its own kind. So weeks ago, in the soft light of her cozy Hyde Park bungalow walls, adorned with finger paint masterpieces and faded photos of her grandkids, Elena had schemed. A discreet email to Ethan's assistant. A special connection for your boss. Details attached. A whispered nudge to Amara during pickup. I've got a friend who'd adore your spirit. Coffee. No strings. Neither knew the other's name, only that Elena promised. Someone who needs a little light. It was meddling, yes, the kind only a woman of Elena's years could pull off with the audacity of lived wisdom. Love doesn't always knock politely, she'd murmur to her cat, Whiskers, as she sealed the digital invites. Sometimes it needs a push. Back at the Ivy Room. Ethan's patience frayed like an old wire. He signaled the waiter, a young man with an earnest smile, and murmured, "The check, please." Something came up. As he pushed back his chair, the scrape against the oak floor cut through the murmur of diners like a reluctant goodbye. He straightened his tie, the silk cool against his throat, and turned toward the exit. The city lights beckoned through the floor-to-ceiling windows, promising the sterile comfort of his River North penthouse, where voice-activated lights and a fridge, stocked by a personal chef, awaited. Alone, as always. Then chaos in miniature, a blur of purple and motion, darted between the legs of a passing couple, past the waiter's polished shoes. A little girl, no more than 4, with tight braids, adorned in tiny purple beads that clicked like rain on a tin roof, barreled straight for him. Her bright purple dress, velvet with a sash tied in a lopsided bow, swished around her knees, and her sneakers, scuffed from playground adventures, squeaked on the floor. She skidded to a halt at his feet, tiny fingers clutching the hem of his trousers with the determination of a climber scaling Everest. Ethan froze, his body a statue in mid-stride. She looked up at him, cheeks flushed from the sprint, her big brown eyes wide as polished chestnuts, brimming with an urgency that no child her age should carry. "My mommy's sorry she's late." She chirped, her voice a melody of rehearsed sincerity, breathless but bold. The words hung in the air, simple as a prayer, yet they pierced him like sunlight through storm clouds. For a heartbeat, the restaurant dissolved, the jazz faded to a distant hum, the clinks silenced. Ethan's mind reeled. Who is this child? Her braids woven with care, that spoke of mornings rushed but loving. Her dress, a splash of joy in a sea of neutrals. And those eyes trusting, expectant, as if she'd crossed an ocean of strangers, just to deliver this message. A message he'd waited a lifetime to hear. His throat tightened, an unfamiliar burn rising behind his eyes. In that instant, he was 8 again on that stoop, whispering to the empty dusk. But this time the apology had arrived not from a ghost of a father, but from a stranger's heart, carried by the smallest of hands. Who are you, sweetheart? He managed his voice, a low rumble softer than he'd intended. He knelt slowly, suit be damned, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, she smelled of strawberry shampoo and crayons, the scent of innocence unmarred. I'm Zoe. She beamed, undeterred, her gap-toothed smile revealing a missing incisor from some playground triumph. And Mommy's coming. She said to tell you, she's really sorry. There was a man who needed help, and she couldn't leave him. She tugged at his pant leg again, insistent. This seat's for her right. The one with the flowers. Ethan's gaze flicked to the empty chair across from him, its white linen napkin folded like a flag of surrender, a single vase of wild asters nodding in silent agreement. He nodded mutely, sinking back into his seat as if pulled by an invisible tide. The little girl's words echoed in his chest, stirring embers he'd long thought cold. Sorry she's late. Not an excuse, not a dismissal, a bridge extended across the chasm of his guarded heart. As Zoe clambered onto the booster seat with the help of a bemused waiter, chattering about purple flowers that dance, Ethan sat, transfixed. The twist of it all, the secret hand of a teacher he'd never met weaving fates like threads in a quilt hovered just beyond his grasp, a mystery wrapped in a child's grin. But in that moment, with the city pulsing beyond the glass, and a tiny hand reaching for his water glass, Ethan felt something shift, a crack in the fortress, a whisper of possibility. Have you ever waited for someone who never came, only to find that the real arrival was the one you least expected? In the quiet corners of our lives, where the heart aches for what was lost sometimes, grace shows up in pigtails and purple dresses, reminding us that love, in all its tender surprises, is worth the wait. Hold on to those moments, dear ones. They're the ones that rewrite our stories. Zoe stood her ground like a tiny oak rooted in the midst of a storm, her scuffed white sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished hardwood floor of the ivy room. At 4 years old, she was a whirlwind of unfiltered purpose, her tight braids each one ending in a cluster of purple beads that clacked softly like wind chimes, swaying as she tilted her head up to meet Ethan's gaze. The restaurant's ambient chatter, the low murmur of conversations laced with the clink of forks on porcelain, seemed to recede into a distant hum, as if the world had politely stepped back to give this moment its due. Ethan's heart, that well-guarded engine of deals and deadlines, stuttered in his chest. He hadn't knelt for a child since he was one himself, back when scraped knees and shared secrets were the currency of connection. My mommy's really sorry. Zoe repeated, her voice a clear bell in the hush, pointing with a chubby finger toward the empty chair across from him. Her small backpack, a faded purple thing, emblazoned with cartoon dragons, dangled precariously from one shoulder, zipper half open, to reveal a crumpled crayon drawing peeking out like a secret flag. There was no hesitation in her, a confidence born not of arrogance, but of the kind of love that wrapped a child in certainty. Ethan, mid-rise from his chair, felt his knees buckle under an invisible weight. He sank back down the leather seat, creaking like an old friend's sigh, his tailored suit suddenly feeling like ill-fitting armor. For the first time in years, the man who orchestrated multi-million-dollar acquisitions found himself utterly disarmed by a 4-year-old's earnest plea. He leaned forward, elbows on the crisp white tablecloth, and studied her. Up close, Zoe's brown eyes sparkled with the unbridled curiosity of childhood, flecked with gold like sunlight on the Chicago River. Her smile broke wide, revealing a gap where her front tooth had recently made its grand exit, probably to the tooth fairy's doorstep, Ethan imagined, with all the ritual and wonder that entailed. "What's your name, brave one?" he asked, his voice dropping to that gentle timbre he reserved for boardroom reassurances, though this felt far more precarious. "Zoe Marie Johnson," she declared, puffing out her chest, as if announcing to a room full of dignitaries. "And you're Mr. Ethan, right? Mommy said you're nice, like the dragon in my book who guards the treasure, but shares it with friends." She mimed wings with her arms, the beads in her hair, jingling in accompaniment, and for a fleeting second, Ethan saw himself in her, the boy who'd devoured fantasy novels under the covers with a flashlight dreaming of worlds where fathers returned as heroes, not shadows. A lump formed in his throat unbidden and sharp. How many nights had he wished for a messenger like this, someone small and fierce? To bridge the silence, Zoe's words weren't just an apology. They were a balm applied without fanfare to a wound he'd pretended long healed. Before he could respond, a rush of energy swept through the entrance like a warm gust off the lake. Amara Johnson burst into view, her breath coming in quick, uneven huffs that spoke of sprints through evening traffic and the unyielding pull of conscience. She was a vision of quiet resilience, mahogany skin glowing under the restaurant's amber lights. Her locks a cascade of thick, coiled strands, tugged into a hasty bun that had already begun to unravel, a few rebellious curls framing her face, like parentheses around a half-written story. Her simple green dress, knee-length and cotton-soft, hugged her curves with the ease of something worn for comfort rather than conquest, its hem slightly frayed from too many washes and too few indulgences. Slung over one shoulder was a canvas tote bag, bulging with the practical poetry of single motherhood, a sippy cup poking out the top, a dog-eared picture book, and what looked like a half-eaten granola bar wrapper, the remnants of a dinner on the go. "Zoe, honey, I told you to wait right by the door." Amara's voice cut through the air, laced with equal parts exasperation and affection, the kind only a mother could wield like a well-honed blade. She scooped Zoe into a quick protective hug, her arms enveloping the child, as if to shield her from the world's sharper edges. Zoe wriggled just enough to beam up at her. "I did it, Mommy. I found him and said the sorry part perfect." Amara's laugh bubbled up, then soft and melodic, a sound like rain on sun-warmed pavement, disarming in its genuineness. Releasing Zoe but keeping a hand on her shoulder, Amara straightened and turned her gaze to Ethan. Their eyes met across the table, and in that suspended breath, time folded. Ethan's breath caught. There was something in her steady brown eyes, deep as aged bourbon, flecked with the quiet fire of someone who'd stared down storms and emerged softer for it, that tugged at the frayed threads of memory. Had he seen her before? In a crowded fundraiser, perhaps, or passing on a sidewalk, her profile etched against the skyline. Or was it deeper, a soul-deep familiarity, like recognizing a melody half-remembered from childhood lullabies? "I'm Amara Johnson," she said, extending her free hand across the table, her palm calloused in places from shelving books and scrubbing counters, yet warm and sure. "And I'm so terribly sorry for keeping you waiting. Well, there was someone who needed a hand, and I couldn't just walk away." Her tone was unadorned, no flourish or fabrication, just the plain truth delivered with the grace of a woman who'd long ago learned that apologies weren't weaknesses, but bridges. Ethan rose halfway from his seat, out of habit, clasping her hand in his. The contact was electric in its simplicity, her grip firm, unyielding, like roots gripping earth after a flood. It grounded him, this touch from a stranger who carried the weight of worlds in her stride. "Ethan Carter." he replied, his voice steadier than he felt, though his thumb lingered a fraction too long on the back of her hand before releasing. He gestured to the chair. "Please sit. And no need for apologies, not when the messenger is this persuasive." Zoe, already scrambling into the booster seat with the waiter's assistants, giggled at that, kicking her legs in delight. As Amara settled in, smoothing Zoe's dress with absent-minded tenderness, a gesture so instinctive it spoke volumes of nights spent mending hems by lamplight. Ethan watched her. There was a rhythm to her movements, a quiet choreography of care, the way she adjusted the tote bag at her feet, ensuring it didn't tip. The subtle scan of the room, not for judgment, but for safety. In her, he glimpsed echoes of his own mother, fierce in her devotion, unbreakable in her quiet endurance. Amara's eyes met his again, and that flicker of recognition deepened. "Why, you... He wondered silently, the question, blooming like a question mark in the space between them. Was it the curve of her smile, reminiscent of old family photos yellowed at the edges, or something more profound, a shared undercurrent of loss that the universe, in its whimsical mercy, had conspired to surface tonight? The waiter hovered discreetly, menus in hand, but Ethan waved him off with a nod. "Take your time," he said to Amara, surprising himself with the softness in his tone. For the first time that evening, the clock on his watch felt irrelevant. In the glow of candlelight, with Zoe's beads still chiming faintly like a promise, Ethan leaned back the fortress of his solitude, cracking just a little wider. Here was a woman whose lateness wasn't neglect, but nobility, a mother whose heart extended beyond her own horizon. And in her presence, the boy on the stoop stirred, daring to hope that some waits ended, not in silence, but in stories yet to unfold. Amara eased Zoe into the booster seat with the practiced grace of a mother who'd turned countless hurried moments into rituals of reassurance. The little girl's legs dangled like pendulums, swinging gently as the waiter, a kind-faced young man named Javier, his name tag glinting under the lights, slid a colorful menu her way, complete with crayon scribbles along the edges for just such occasions. Amara's fingers lingered on Zoe's braids, those neat cornrows woven with purple threads that caught the candlelight like threads of twilight. She traced one lightly, a feather touch born of mornings, when the alarm buzzed too early, and the world felt too heavy, yet love demanded they rise anyway. "There we go, baby girl," she murmured, her voice a soft anchor in the restaurant's elegant swell. Zoe beamed up at her, those big brown eyes crinkling at the corners, already reaching for the menu, as if it held the secrets to the universe. Across the table, Ethan watched his own hands idle for once, fingers that usually danced across keyboards or gripped steering wheels, now folded loosely in his lap. The air between them hummed with unspoken questions, the jazz trio in the corner weaving a saxophone solo that curled like smoke around their silence. Amara straightened, smoothing the front of her green dress with a quick, self-conscious brush, then met his gaze head-on. There was no artifice in her posture, no calculated tilt of the head, just the steady poise of a woman who'd learned to carry herself through tempests without apology. "There was this man at the bus stop." She began, her tone even like recounting a recipe rather than a detour from destiny. She settled into her chair, the wooden legs whispering against the floor, and tucked a stray lock behind her ear, a curl that had rebelled against the bun framing her face with defiant softness. Right there on 63rd, where the L train rattles overhead like it's got somewhere important to be. He was older, maybe in his 70s, slumped against the bench with his hands shaking like autumn leaves in a gale. Panic attack, I think, sweat beading on his forehead, breaths coming in these ragged hitches that made my own chest tighten, just watching. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his green eyes narrowing, not in skepticism, but in a quiet hunger for the details. In his world of encrypted data streams and predictive algorithms, human frailty was abstracted into risk assessments and contingency plans. But here was Amara painting it vivid, the acrid tang of exhaust mingling with the faint metallic scent of fear. The indifferent shuffle of commuters parting around him, like water around a stone. He dropped his grocery bag. She continued, her voice dipping lower, as if sharing a confidence. Cans of soup rolling into the gutter, a loaf of bread splitting open on the cracked sidewalk. Folks just stepped over it, eyes on phones, shoulders hunched against the wind. I just couldn't keep walking. She paused, glancing at Zoe, who was now absorbed in tracing the menu's doodles with a chubby finger, oblivious to the weight of her mother's words. Ethan's brow arched a subtle lift that betrayed the whirlpool in his mind. Chicago's rush hour was a beast unto itself, elbows jostling on crowded platforms, horns blaring like accusations, the relentless pulse of a city that rewarded speed over stillness. He'd navigated it 1,000 times in his chauffeured SUV, glass tinted against the chaos, his focus laser sharp on the next merger, the next firewall breach, averted. "You stopped," he said the words, half question, half revelation. "For a stranger. In the middle of all that." Amara shrugged, a small lift of her shoulders that carried the ease of habit, like shrugging off a rain-soaked coat. "Someone had to write." I knelt down, gathered up those cans, peaches mostly the kind in heavy syrup that reminds you of Sunday dinners gone by, handed them back, kept my voice low and steady like I do when Zoe has one of her nightmares. "Breathe with me," I told him. "In through the nose, out like you're blowing bubbles." He looked at me, then really looked, with these watery blue eyes, the kind that hold a lifetime of unshared sorrows. Said his name was Harold, that his wife passed last winter, and the empty apartment. Well, it just closed in sometimes. Zoe piped up, then her voice a bright interruption, swinging her legs with renewed vigor. "Mommy helps everybody, like when the birdie fell from the tree at the park. She made a nest with her sweater. She mimed nesting with her arms, the purple beads in her braids clacking like applause." Amara chuckled, a warm ripple that softened the lines around her eyes, and reached over to squeeze Zoe's hand. "That's my girl, always watching out for the little ones." But Ethan's thoughts spun faster now, a cascade of code unraveling in his head. He'd built Carter's cyber shield on the bedrock of precision lines, of flawless syntax, that predicted hacks before they landed, systems so airtight they breathed security. Every second optimized, every delay a potential exploit. And yet, across from him, sat this woman, this black single mother from the South Side, whose tote bag slumped at her feet like a faithful companion, its fabric worn thin from library halls and playground picnics. He could see it peeking out, a sippy cup etched with dragon stickers, a dog-eared copy of Where the Wild Things Are, its spine cracked from bedtime readings under a single bulb. That bag wasn't just luggage. It was a ledger of quiet battles, the double shifts at the bookstore, where she dusted shelves heavy with stories she couldn't afford to buy, the nights waitressing at Della's diner, dodging leers and tipsy propositions with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Widowed at 31, left to navigate a world that too often saw her as a statistic rather than a symphony of strength, the fierce love for Zoe braided into every dawn. The unspoken grief for Marcus, her husband, gone too soon, from a heart that gave out mid-laugh at a family barbecue. As a black woman raising her daughter in Englewood, where red-lined streets whispered old wounds, Amara had learned early that kindness wasn't a luxury, it was survival. The world might overlook her sideline, her dreams of opening her own little reading nook for neighborhood kids, but she refused to let it harden her. That warmth unyielding as Lake Michigan's horizon radiated from her, now wrapping the table in an invisible embrace. Ethan felt it like a pang in his chest, sharp and sweet, the gulf between her life and his. His penthouse in River North, with its floor-to-ceiling views of the glittering skyline, and a fridge that hummed emptily despite its bounty. Solitude polished to a shine where evenings blurred into emails, and the occasional glass of scotch neat, chasing ghosts he pretended not to see. His father's absence had taught him control as armor. Hers had forged empathy as wings. "You remind me of someone," he said softly, the words slipping out before he could firewall them. Amara tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes like fireflies at dusk. "My mother." He clarified, his voice threading through the memory. She'd stop for anyone, the neighbor with the leaky roof, the stray cat with a limp. Said life was too short not to lend a hand when it trembled. He hadn't spoken of her in years, not since the nursing home visits, dwindled to holidays, her hands frail, but still clasping his with that same unshakable grip. Amara's smile deepened, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. Woman to man, survivor to survivor. Javier returned then, notepad poised, but the moment lingered suspended like dew on a web. In the heart of the Ivy Room's refined hum, amid linen and crystal, two worlds, brushed edges not clashing but converging. Ethan's empire felt vast and vacant, beside the intimate kingdom Amara had carved, from scraps of time and tenderness. And in that brush, something tender unfurled, the possibility that delays, those hated fractures in the schedule, might be the very cracks where light and love seeped in. The waiter Javier returned with the grace of someone who'd seen 1,000 first dates unfold under these very lights, balancing plates like offerings on an altar of possibility. For Zoe, a golden triangle of grilled cheese, its edges crisped to perfection. Steam curling up like a child's daydream. Amara's seared salmon arrived glistening, flecked with lemon zest and herbs that whispered of summer gardens long past. And for Ethan, the steak medium-rare juices, pooling like unspoken regrets, cut with the precision of a man who'd learned to slice through tension as easily as ribeye. The aromas mingled in the air, buttery warmth, citrus brightness, the earthy char of beef, a symphony that grounded the table in the simple sacrament of shared meals. As forks lifted and glasses touched Zoe's in a sippy cup, disguised as fine crystal filled with sparkling apple juice, conversation began to flow, tentative at first, like a river testing its banks after drought. Amara cut into her salmon with deliberate care, her movements unhurried, as if savoring not just the fish, but the rarity of this pause. "So tell me about your days." Ethan ventured, his voice threading through the jazz riff that had shifted to a slower, more introspective melody. He speared a bite of steak, but his eyes stayed on her, tracing the way her locks caught the flicker of the candle between them. Amara smiled, that easy curve of lips that held no pretense, and wiped a smudge of cheese from Zoe's chin with her napkin. "Oh, mine. I work at this little bookstore on 79th, in the South Side, Pages and Promises, we call it. It's one of those places where the shelves lean a bit like they're tired from holding all the stories, but they never let go. I shelve during the day, recommend reads to folks who wander in, looking for escape. Evenings I wait tables at Della's Diner down the block, greasy spoons and bottomless coffee for the night shift crowd." She laughed then, a soft, resonant sound that rolled like distant thunder over Lake Michigan, warm without a trace of self-pity. "Just keeping the lights on. You know Zoe here thinks the electricity fairy does it, but Mama's got to play her part." There was no shame in her words, no bowed head or averted gaze, just the quiet dignity of a woman who'd stitched her life from the remnants of loss. Ethan nodded, pausing mid-air, struck by the contrast to his own ledger of days, dawn meetings in glass towers, where mergers were sealed with handshakes as cold as the air-conditioning afternoons, blurred by screens forecasting threats that felt trivial, next to the real ones, the empty chair at family holidays, the echo of his mother's voice fading in memory. "Sounds full," he said, choosing his words like lines of code, precise, but probing. "My world's the opposite cybersecurity, building walls around data, predicting breaches before they happen. Boardrooms full of suits talking acquisitions like they're collecting baseball cards. See." Zoe, her grilled cheese, reduced to a triumphant pile of crusts, suddenly perked up her braids, swinging like pendulums. "Mama, tell Mr. Ethan about the puppy," she demanded, her voice piping clear over the restaurant's hum, drawing a fond chuckle from Javier as he refilled water glasses. Amara's eyes sparkled with mischief, and she leaned in toward Ethan, conspiratorial. "Ah, the puppy. Last week at the park, this scruffy little mutt, part terrier, part who knows what, bolted right into Zoe's lap during story time, all wagging tail and pleading eyes like he'd read every book on the shelf and decided ours was the one with the happy ending. We couldn't keep him, of course, apartment rules and all, but Zoe named him Sparkles on the spot. Spent the whole walk home plotting his imaginary adventures." Ethan found himself grinning, a rare, unguarded pull at his lips that softened the sharp lines of his face. Zoe launched into her own version, arms flailing to mimic the dog's joyful bounds, her laughter bubbling up like a spring after winter's thaw. The interruptions kept the evening light weaving threads of whimsy through the adult exchanges, Zoe's wide-eyed wonder a buffer against the heavier undercurrents. Ethan shared a snippet, then unbidden a tale of a late-night server crash during a high-stakes merger, the team huddled in fluorescent-lit panic coffee going cold as they patched the void. "Felt like herding cats," he admitted. "But we pulled it off. Reminded me of my first job out of college fixing printers in a library, back when dial-up was king." Amara listened with genuine tilt of her head, her fork tracing patterns in her plate's remnants, absorbing his words not as status symbols but as windows into the man beneath. In her, Ethan glimpsed the women of his youth, his grandmother with her apron dusted in flour, listening to his grandfather's tales of factory shifts without interruption. His mother nodding over PTA meetings, her empathy, a quiet force that held their fractured home together. Amara's life pieced from bookstore dust and diner grease, hummed with a vitality his polished isolation lacked, a reminder that true security wasn't in firewalls, but in the messy mending grace of human ties. Then, in a blink of childhood entropy, Zoe reached for her juice with the enthusiasm of an explorer claiming new lands. The glass tipped a cascade of amber liquid splashing across Amara's lap, soaking the green fabric in a blooming stain that spread like spilled secrets. Zoe's eyes widened in horror. "Oh no, Mommy Sparkles did it." Amara gasped softly, more startled than upset, pushing back her chair with a scrape that cut the air. "It's okay, baby, accidents happen to the best of us." She fumbled for her napkin, but Ethan was already moving instinct overriding calculation. From his jacket's inner pocket, he drew a monogrammed handkerchief. Fine Irish linen edges stitched with EC in subtle silver thread, a relic from his father's side carried more as talisman than tool. He leaned across the table, dabbing gently at the damp spot just above her knee, his touch light as a question, efficient yet tender. The fabric whispered against her dress, absorbing the spill with quiet competence. Amara stilled her breath, catching, and in that suspended heartbeat, their fingers brushed his cool and steady hers, warm from the meal's lingering heat. The air thickened, the jazz fading to a murmur. the restaurant's pulse slowing to match the quickened rhythm of two hearts brushing edges. She looked up at him, then really looked, her brown eyes searching his green ones with an intensity that peeled back layers. The guarded billionaire, the waiting boy, the man adrift in his own vastness. "You're not what I expected." She whispered the words soft as a confession in church laced with surprise. And something deeper, a flicker of recognition, like spotting a familiar face in an old photograph. "Neither are you," Ethan replied, his voice stripped of its usual armor, raw and resonant in the quiet. He withdrew his hand, slowly folding the damp cloth with care, but the contact lingered a spark that warmed the spaces between them. Zoe recovered from her mishap, munched obliviously on a breadstick, but the moment held fragile and full, a bridge forged from linen and accident. He didn't voice the twist churning in his mind, the quick text to Sarah during Amara's earlier rush, her reply pinging back. "Ms. Harper set it up. Knows you from the gala, her from school. Said you both needed a nudge." Why would a preschool teacher with her silver hair and schoolmarm wisdom meddle in the orbits of strangers? Then pocketed the phone, the question, a quiet storm. But tonight, under the Ivy Room's benevolent glow, it felt less intrusion than invitation. In Amara's gaze, he saw not just a woman across a spill, but a mirror to his own unspoken yearnings, the hope that connections like stains could be gently tended rather than scrubbed away. And in that glimpse, the evening's light shifted, illuminating paths neither had mapped, but both perhaps had long been walking toward. Weeks slipped by like pages in one of Amara's well-loved books, each chapter turning with the quiet inevitability of autumn leaves drifting over Millennium Park. Ethan Carter. The man whose days were once mapped in algorithms and after-hours emails found himself charting new coordinates. The unpredictable rhythm of laughter from a 4-year-old, the steady cadence of a woman's voice reciting bedtime verses over the phone. He was drawn to them, Amara and Zoe like a compass, recalibrating to true north, the pull both disorienting and undeniable. What began as a single evening in the Ivy Room had unfurled into stolen afternoons and serendipitous evenings. No grand gestures required, just the simple alchemy of presence. Their meetings were unscripted, woven into the fabric of Amara's world rather than his. One crisp Saturday, they converged at a cluster of food trucks parked along the park's edge, where the air hummed with the sizzle of empanadas and the tang of fresh churros dusted in cinnamon. Ethan arrived early, hands in the pockets of his wool overcoat, less Savile Row, more off the rack from a corner store, a concession to the casual sprawl of the scene. He spotted them before they saw him, Zoe skipping ahead in her rain boots, splashing through shallow puddles left from a morning drizzle, while Amara trailed with that unhurried stride, her locks tied back with a colorful scarf that fluttered like a flag of quiet defiance. "Mr. Ethan," Zoe squealed upon sighting him, launching into his legs with the force of a tiny hurricane. He scooped her up effortlessly, her giggles vibrating against his chest, and for a moment, the billionaire vanished, replaced by a man whose heart swelled at the weight of a child's trust. They settled on a weathered picnic blanket Ethan had packed, another small adaptation pulled from the trunk of his understated sedan, devouring tacos al pastor, while Zoe regaled him with tales of her latest preschool conquest, a finger-painted dragon that breathed fire made of red glitter. Amara watched them, her salmon taco half-eaten in her lap, eyes soft with a gratitude she didn't voice. These outings felt like breaths of fresh air in her packed schedule, a respite from the double shifts that left her feet aching and her dreams deferred. Yet she never asked for more. Her independence was her crown, worn with the grace of someone who'd learned to stand tall amid the rubble of loss. Other days found them in the hushed sanctuary of Pages and Promises, the South Side bookstore, where Amara's shifts blurred the line between work and worship. The shop was a labyrinth of leaning shelves, the air thick with the comforting musk of aged paper and freshly ground coffee. From the nook in the corner, a ritual Amara had started to draw in the neighborhood's quiet souls. Ethan would slip in mid-afternoon, when the light slanted through the front window, like golden fingers, pretending to browse the sci-fi section while stealing glances at her behind the counter. Zoe, perched on a low stool with a stack of board books, would spot him first, whispering dramatically, "The Dragon Knight is here," as if he were a character from her stories come to life. It was on one such visit the third week in that Ethan presented his offering. Tucked under his arm was a worn copy of The Dragon Prince, its cover faded from years of eager hands, pages yellowed but intact, sourced from a second-hand shop in Wicker Park after hours of covert research into Zoe's favorites. He knelt beside her in the children's corner, a nook Amara had curated with cushions, sewn from remnant fabrics, and fairy lights strung like captured stars. "For the bravest dragon tamer I know," he said, holding it out like a sacred text. Zoe's eyes widened to saucers, her small hands reverently tracing the embossed scales on the dragon's wing. "Keep it forever," she gasped, clutching it to her chest, as if it might vanish like a dream at dawn. The earnestness in her voice, the unfiltered joy of possession, without strings, twisted something deep in Ethan's gut. He nodded, throat tight. "Forever and always, kiddo. But only if you promise to read the part about the hidden cave to your mom. She's got a knack for finding treasures." Amara, overhearing from the register, paused in ringing up a customer's vintage mystery, her smile blooming, slow and genuine. But it was Jamal who broke the spell first. Amara's co-worker, a lanky bookseller in his late 20s, with skin like polished teak wire-rimmed glasses, perpetually askew, and a wit sharp as the dog-eared paperbacks he adored. Jamal sidled up, wiping his hands on his faded band tee. The Roots, a nod to his Philly roots, and clapped Ethan on the shoulder with mock gravity. "Well, well, if it isn't the billionaire bookworm gracing our humble stacks. What's next?" Ethan funding a private jet for overdue returns. He waggled his eyebrows at Amara, who rolled her eyes, but couldn't suppress the laugh that bubbled up rich and unforced. "Jamal, behave. Not everyone's got your flair for drama." Jamal leaned against a shelf, arms crossed. "Drama, honey. This is romance novel realness. Tacos in the park. Surprise dragon tomes girl. You've got a plot twist walking in Armani." The teasing hung light in the air, a sibling-like ribbing that spoke to the easy camaraderie of the shop, a haven where judgments were left at the door and stories were the great equalizer. Amara swatted at him with a rolled-up newsletter, but her cheeks warmed under the glow of the coffee machine, a flush that had nothing to do with the steam. Ethan chuckled along the sound, foreign, yet fitting like a puzzle piece, slotting home. In Jamal's jest, he glimpsed the buffer of friendship Amara had built around her vulnerabilities, a network of souls who saw her not as the widow or the single mom hustling 2 jobs, but as the force of nature who could recommend a healing read for a heartbroken teen or brew the perfect cup for a weary elder. As the weeks deepened their bond, Ethan began to truly see her the way Amara carried herself, not in spite of her circumstances, but because of them. A black woman raising Zoe solo in the shadow of Englewood's resilient streets after Marcus's sudden passing 4 years prior. A heart attack at 32, gone mid-sentence during a backyard cookout, leaving her to gather the pieces alone. She'd faced the whispers, pitying glances at parent-teacher nights, The subtle side-eye from folks assuming her path to single motherhood was a cautionary tale rather than a testament to survival. "You're so strong," they'd say, as if it were a compliment rather than a burden she never asked to bear. But Amara wore her strength like a well-worn shawl, soft, enveloping, woven from late-night grief journals and dawn yoga sessions on the fire escape, where she'd whisper affirmations to the rising sun. "Am enough. We are enough." It wasn't defiance. It was devotion poured into Zoe's braids, into the community story hours she hosted at the shop, into the quiet resolve that turned strangers' sorrows into shared solace. Ethan, steeped in the rarefied air of privileged private jets to Davos, a Rolodex of influencers who traded favors like currency, felt the hollow echo of his own abundance. His wealth bought security. Yes, the penthouse with its automated everything, the foundation grants that papered over societal cracks without mending them. But it couldn't purchase the raw, radiant power Amara embodied. The alchemy of turning scarcity into abundance, judgment into joy. Late at night, alone in his River North Airy, he'd replay their moments, Zoe's head on his shoulder during a park bench, read aloud, Amara's hand brushing his as they passed a thermos of tea. It humbled him, this glimpse of a life unarmored, where love wasn't leveraged, but lived fierce and free. Yet he held one thread close, unshared. The secret of Ms. Harper's orchestration gleaned from Sarah's terse confirmation. "She's a force boss, taught my niece. Saw your soft spot at the gala. Why meddle?" Ethan pondered it during drives home, the city lights blurring into questions. Would Amara laugh it off as kismet, or see it as pity from afar? For now, he let the mystery simmer, a quiet ember in the growing warmth between them. In the meantime, their bond deepened root by root, promising that what bloomed from such soil might just outlast the seasons. The first light of a Chicago October morning filtered through the gauzy curtains of Amara's Englewood apartment, painting the walls in soft strokes of amber and rose. It was one of those rare Saturdays when the alarm stayed silent, allowing her to linger in the warmth of her quilt, a patchwork heirloom from her grandmother, stitched with memories of lazy afternoons in the kitchen, where stories were swapped over pots of collards and cornbread. Amara stirred her body heavy with the ache of yesterday's double shift, but her heart lighter than it had been in years. Zoe was still asleep in the next room, her breaths a rhythmic whisper through the thin wall, dreaming no doubt of dragons and park swings. For the first time since Marcus, Amara had begun to imagine a future not shadowed by solitude, a future where laughter echoed beyond bedtime routines, where a hand reached for hers, not out of habit, but hope. Then her phone buzzed on the nightstand, insistent as a persistent fly shattering the quiet. Once, twice, a cascade of notifications lighting up the screen, like fireflies in distress. Amara squinted, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and tapped the first one open. It was a news alert from some glossy tabloid app she'd never bothered to delete. Billionaire's secret romance with single mom love, or PR stunt. Her stomach twisted, a cold knot forming as she scrolled. There, splashed across the digital front page in bold, screaming font, was a grainy photo. Ethan, his back to the camera, pushing Zoe on the swing at the rec center playground, her braids flying like dark ribbons in the wind. Another captured Amara, mid-laugh, her head thrown back, hand lightly on his arm, as they crossed the street near Pages and Promises, the autumn leaves blurring into a halo around them. Innocent moments pilfered from joy, now dissected like evidence in a trial. The article was a venomous brew speculation laced with innuendo, anonymous sources, whispering about Ethan's sudden soft spot for sob stories. Comments flooded the thread below, a digital mob baying at shadows. Gold digger alert bet. She's after that penthouse view. PR move for his image. Single moms are the new cause célèbre. He can do better than Englewood trash. Amara's breath hitched, each word landing like a stone in still water, rippling through the fragile peace she'd nurtured. She'd fought these ghosts her whole life. The sidelong glances at the grocery checkout, when her EBT card swiped the patronizing pats from well-meaning church ladies who cooed, "God don't give us more than we can bear, honey." As a black woman widowed young, raising Zoe on the South Side's stubborn soil, she'd armored herself against the assumptions that her love was transactional, her strength a novelty, her dreams deferred by default. Marcus had shielded her from the worst of it, his easy grin a buffer against the world's sharper edges. But now, in the cold clarity of morning light, her private sanctuary, the tentative bloom of something real with Ethan, had been dragged into, the glare twisted into a caricature for clicks and shares. She set the phone down, hands trembling, and padded to Zoe's room. The little girl stirred, clutching her stuffed dragon from Ethan, its scales worn from nightly adventures. Amara knelt, brushing a curl from Zoe's forehead, the simple act, a lifeline. "This is ours," she thought fiercely, "not theirs to judge." But the wound festered, a quiet erosion of the trust she'd begun to rebuild. By noon, dressed in her work apron over jeans and a faded sweater, Amara arrived at the bookstore, the bell above the door tinkling like a hesitant apology. The shop smelled of vanilla lattes and fresh ink, a balm against the storm in her chest. Jamal was behind the counter sorting returns, but one look at her face, and he straightened. Rough night. Or did the world decide to be extra today? Before she could answer, the door swung open again, admitting Ethan. He carried a paper bag from the corner bakery, cinnamon twists, for Zoe, who was already there, sprawled on the reading rug, with crayons and construction paper lost in a world of swirling colors. His smile faltered as he caught Amara's expression, the green of his eyes clouding like a sudden squall. "Amara, what's—" She thrust her phone at him, the screen still open to the article, her voice a whisper shard. "This, all of this." The words tumbled out, then raw and unfiltered, as customers milled in the aisles, oblivious. "They've turned us into a sideshow. Me, the single mom lottery winner. You, the savior swooping in for good optics. I thought what we had was ours. Private. Real." Her throat tightened, tears pricking hot at the corners of her eyes. Tears she'd learned to swallow in boardrooms, of judgment at welfare offices that treated her like a line item. "I'm not your charity case, Ethan. I'm not some feel-good footnote in your empire." He stepped closer, the bag crinkling forgotten in his fist, his broad frame shrinking under the weight of her pain. The bookstore's hush amplified the space between them, shelves of stories bearing silent witness. "Amara," he said, voice low, and laced with a vulnerability she'd only glimpsed before, the boy on the stoop, peeking through the Billionaire'S veneer. "I never saw you that way. Not once. You're real. The first real thing in years. Those photos, that noise. It's vultures circling what they can't touch. But us, this." He gestured helplessly between them, then to Zoe, whose crayons paused mid-stroke. "It's not a stunt. It's the only part of my life that feels like home." Zoe looked up, then her brown eyes wide and searching a blue crayon, clutched like a talisman. The rug around her was a riot of scribbles, dragons and swings, a family of stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun. "Mommy," she ventured, voice small in the charged air, "is Mr. Ethan going away, like the puppy that ran off?" The question hung innocent as a dandelion seed, carrying the weight of a child's unscarred heart. Amara's resolve cracked, a sob catching in her throat. Zoe's words echoed the fears she'd buried, the impermanence of joy, the comings and goings that left echoes, but no anchors. She knelt, pulling her daughter close, inhaling the scent of crayons and baby shampoo. No, baby. No one's going anywhere. We're just figuring it out. Ethan watched his jaw set against the ache blooming in his chest, the echo of his own father's vanishing acts, the way absence carved canyons in a young heart. He wanted to bridge the gap, to wrap them both in the certainty his wealth couldn't buy. But pride that fierce guardian Amara wielded like a shield demanded space. "I'll give you time," he murmured, setting the bag on the counter with deliberate care, each twist inside a silent promise of mornings yet to come. "But I'm not running. Not from this." He met her eyes one last time, the green depths pleading what words couldn't. "Stay with me in the mess." Then, with a nod to Jamal, who hovered like a sentinel hand on Amara's shoulder, he turned and slipped out the bell's chime, a reluctant farewell. Amara sank onto the rug beside Zoe, pulling her into her lap, the child's warmth a fragile dam against the flood. Jamal busied himself with inventory, giving them the gift of privacy, but his eyes held the quiet solidarity of friends who'd weathered their own storms. The tabloid's barbs lingered festering like untreated splinters, the erasure of her agency, the cheapening of her love. Yet in the hush as Zoe resumed her drawing, adding a heart around the stick figures, Amara felt the stir of something resilient. She'd survived worse the hollow mornings after Marcus, the night's rationing formula with prayers. This scrutiny was just another shadow fleeting against the sun of what they'd built. But as the afternoon waned, the wound throbbed, a reminder that love once exposed demanded not just hearts, but courage to claim it anew. 3 days, 72 hours, that stretched like taffy, pulling at the seams of Ethan's carefully rebuilt composure. In the sterile expanse of his River North penthouse, the city skyline mocked him through floor-to-ceiling glass towers of glass and steel symbols of his unassailable success, now feeling like bars on a gilded cage. He'd buried himself in work, back-to-back calls with Tokyo investors, firewalls reinforced against phantom threats, emails dispatched like arrows into the void. But the quiet moments betrayed him, the empty dinner plate at midnight, the echo of Zoe's laughter in his ears, the ghost of Amara's hand in his during a park stroll. The tabloid storm had raged on headlines morphing from scandal to schadenfreude, but Ethan ignored the PR team's frantic scripts. This wasn't a crisis to manage. It was a heart laid bare waiting for permission to mend. On the third evening, as the sun dipped low over Englewood's tree-lined blocks, casting long shadows that danced like hesitant lovers, Ethan made his choice. No chauffeured car, this time, no sleek black sedan purring at the curb. He drove his old pickup from college days, the one gathering dust in the garage, its engine rumbling like a confession. Dressed down to faded jeans that hugged his legs, with the comfort of familiarity and a gray hoodie, zipped against the chill, he looked less like a tech titan and more like a man coming home. In each hand, a crinkled plastic grocery bag from the corner bodega, one bulging with instant ramen packs, the spicy chicken kind Amara had mentioned offhand during a late-night call, her voice tired but teasing, and the other stuffed with Zoe's favorite gummy worms, those neon twists of sugar and whimsy she'd devoured during their park picnic, declaring them magic ropes for dragons. The apartment building loomed modest and sturdy brick facade, etched with the patina of urban endurance, steps swept clean, despite the fall leaves skittering at the edges. Ethan's knuckles rapped softly on the door, number 3B marked with a faded wreath of silk sunflowers. Amara had hung last spring, a nod to brighter days. His heart hammered harder than the knock, a rhythm of doubt and devotion. What if she'd locked him out for good? What if the world's cruelty had convinced her he was just another fleeting shadow? The door creaked open, and there she was. Amara in yoga pants and an oversized sweater that swallowed her frame. Her locks loose and wild from a day of corralling curls and corralling fears. Her brown eyes, still shadowed by the bruise of betrayal, widened at the sight of him, unpolished, unannounced, utterly unlike the Ethan of headlines. For a beat, silence held them thick as the cooling air between seasons. Then Zoe's voice piped from within a clarion call. "Mommy, someone's at the door. Is it the mailman with dragon mail?" Amara's gaze softened, the edges melting like frost under tentative sun. She stepped aside, wordless invitation, and Ethan crossed the threshold into the heart of her world, a living room bathed in the glow of a single lamp, walls adorned with Zoe's finger paint masterpieces, and framed photos of Marcus, his grin wide and eternal, cradling a newborn Zoe. The air smelled of lavender from a thrift store diffuser, and the faint, comforting tang of mac and cheese reheated from lunch. No penthouse polish here, just the honest clutter of life, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, a throw blanket rumpled from afternoon stories. "I'm not here as a CEO," Ethan said, his voice roughened by 3 days of unsaid words, the bags rustling like nervous accomplices at his sides. He set them down gently, as if they were fragile as eggshells. "No statements, no spin. I'm here because you and Zoe, you're my home. The only place that doesn't feel like it's echoing." Amara's breath caught her hand fluttering to her throat, fingers tracing the silver locket Marcus had given her on their first anniversary, a simple oval, etched with "Forever starts here." Tears welled unbidden, tracing silver paths down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. In his eyes, she saw the man who'd knelt to wipe juice from her dress, who'd read dragon lore with theatrical growls that set Zoe into fits of delight. Not the billionaire, but the boy who'd waited too long on too many stoops. "Ethan," she whispered the name, a bridge across the chasm. Before she could say more, a whirlwind erupted from the hallway, Zoe barefoot in polka dot pajamas, clutching something white and folded like a prized artifact. She barreled into Ethan's legs, hugging tight, before thrusting her offering upward. "Mr. Ethan, Mommy fixed it." In her small palm lay his handkerchief, the monogrammed linen, from the Ivy Room, now starched crisp and ironed smooth, the EC gleaming as if reborn. Amara had washed it by hand that first night after the spill, the simple act, a talisman against the unraveling, a quiet vow to tend what mattered. Ethan knelt, taking it with reverence, his thumb brushing the fabric where their fingers had once touched. The gesture undid him, this small reclamation, a thread pulled from chaos into care. "Thank you, brave one," he murmured, voice thick, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Zoe beamed, gap-toothed and glorious. "Now you can wipe dragon tears." Amara laughed, then a watery burst that broke the tension like sunlight through rain and pulled them both inside. "You bought ramen?" she asked, peering into the bags, her tone a mix of incredulity and affection, the tears still glistening, but her smile genuine, a bloom after frost. "And gummy worms." Ethan added, his grin tentative but true, the lines around his eyes crinkling with the relief of reprieve. "The good ones with the sour kick. Figured we could make a feast of it. No silverware required." They migrated to the sofa, a sagging sectional that had seen better days, but cradled them now like an old friend. Ethan unpacked the bounty on the scarred coffee table. Ramen bowls, microwaved to steaming perfection, gummy worms, coiled like treasures on the side. Zoe wedged herself between them, a warm comma in the narrative remote in hand, as she navigated to her dragon cartoon, a colorful saga of fire breathers and unlikely heroes, the screen flickering blue across their faces. The three of them ate cross-legged chopsticks, clacking laughter punctuating the slurps and sighs. Zoe narrated the show with dramatic flair. "Watch, Mommy, the dragon's gonna share his gold," her head lolling against Ethan's shoulder, gummy worm dangling from her lip like a mustache. In the lull as the episode faded to credits and Zoe's eyelids drooped toward dreams, Amara turned to him, her voice a soft probe in the dim light. "How did we even end up on that date, Ethan? The Ivy room, the blind setup. It felt too perfect, like someone scripted it." He hesitated, the confession heavy on his tongue, braced for the storm anger, at the meddling resentment, at the orchestration. But truth was the only offering left. "Ms. Harper," he said quietly, folding the handkerchief into his pocket, like a promise kept. "Zoe's teacher. She knew me from a charity thing, you from school conferences. Said we both had that look like we were waiting for something without knowing what. She nudged our worlds together. No app, no coincidence. Just her heart playing matchmaker." Amara stilled, then miracle of miracles, her laughter spilled out, genuine and grounding, a cascade that shook her shoulders and drew a sleepy giggle from Zoe. "That woman," she said, wiping fresh tears, these ones born of joy. "Always can thiep, meddling my mama would call it. Last year, she nudged me into joining the PTA bake sale with her secret lemon bars recipe. Turned out half the dads showed up just for a slice." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his, the calluses on hers, a map of labors he'd only begun to trace. "No anger here, Ethan. Just gratitude. Sometimes the universe needs a silver-haired push." In that tangle of limbs and lamplight, with the cartoon's end credits rolling and the city humming soft, outside the wound of the tabloids began to knit, not with grand stitches, but the slow, sure weave of forgiveness. Ethan pulled them closer, Zoe's breaths evening into sleep between them, and felt the echo of home settle deep, not in marble floors or merger deals, but here in the ramen, steam, and resilient laughter, where love returned, not as conqueror, but companion. For Amara, it was a mending too, the reminder that vulnerability wasn't fracture, but the fertile ground where new stories took root. And in the quiet, as stars pricked the Englewood sky, they lingered, three hearts, sinking to a rhythm older than headlines, steadier than storms. The October morning arrived like a long-awaited letter from an old friend, crisp and clear, with the first true bite of autumn, whispering through the Englewood streets. Leaves painted in defiant strokes of crimson and gold skittered across the sidewalks like confetti from a forgotten parade crunching underfoot in a symphony of small joys. Amara zipped Zoe's light jacket a little higher, the fabric a soft blue that matched the sky overhead, while Ethan balanced a thermos of coffee in one hand and a canvas tote of art supplies in the other. Crayons, markers, and those fat sidewalk chalk sticks Zoe had begged for at the dollar store. At 38, Ethan moved with a newfound ease, his jeans and flannel shirt, a far cry from the suits that once armored him, as if the weight of his empire had finally settled into something wearable, something warm. The trio set out on foot toward the community rec center a few blocks away, a squat brick building with a chain-link fence and a sign that read, "Bright Futures After School," in peeling letters. It was the kind of place that anchored neighborhoods like this one, basketball courts scarred from endless games, a mural of local heroes splashed across the sidewall, firefighters, teachers, everyday saints, in faded acrylic. Today marked the annual Kids Chalk Festival, a free event where families turned the parking lot into a sprawling canvas drawing dreams under the watchful eyes of volunteers with thermoses of hot cider. Amara had volunteered to help with setup, her love for these gatherings rooted in memories of her own childhood block parties, where grandmothers like hers would orchestrate hopscotch grids and share recipes scrawled on napkin corners. Zoe skipped ahead, her braids freshly redone that morning by Amara's steady hands, each one threaded with tiny yellow beads, like captured sunbeams bouncing with every step. At 4, she was a force of unbridled invention, her purple sneakers kicking up leaves as she chattered about the rainbow monsters she'd conjure today. Ethan fell into step beside Amara, their shoulders brushing in that companionable way that had become habit over the past month. The tabloid frenzy had ebbed to a murmur, drowned out by the steady drip of normalcy school drop-offs, where he'd linger for an extra hug, quiet dinners of takeout stir-fry on her worn kitchen table evenings, where he'd read Zoe to sleep with voices that grew less robotic by the night. Ms. Harper's meddling had become their private legend, a story retold with laughter over shared mugs of tea, the silver-haired teacher winking knowingly at parent pickup, as if she'd scripted the stars themselves. At the rec center, the lot buzzed with early arrivals, toddlers smudging chalk on concrete, parents sipping from travel cups, the air alive with the squeals of creation. Zoe beelined for a blank stretch of sidewalk near the entrance, dropping to her knees, with the totes chalk spilling out like buried treasure. Amara handed her a fat white stick, kneeling beside her, to supervise, while Ethan lingered a moment, watching the scene unfold. Zoe worked with fierce concentration, her tongue poking out in determination, tracing 3 simple stick figures side by side, a tall one with spiky hair, Ethan unmistakably a medium one with curly lines for locks, Amara and a tiny one with braids and a lopsided grin herself. Above them, in wobbly letters that veered like a tipsy bee, she scrawled, "My family." The words landed soft but seismic, etching themselves into the morning chill. Ethan felt his chest tighten, a swell of emotion rising like tidewater, unbidden, overwhelming. He'd built fortunes on foresight, on systems that predicted every variable. Yet here was proof of the unpredictable grace of the heart, a child's chalk mark, impermanent as breath on glass, declaring a truth he'd only begun to claim. He sank to one knee beside Zoe, the pavement cool through his jeans, and traced a gentle circle around the drawing, a protective halo of blue, like the edge of a storybook page. "That's us, huh?" he said, voice husky meeting Zoe's gaze. She nodded solemnly, beads clicking. "Forever family. No dragons can break it." Amara watched from her spot coffee cup, steaming forgotten in her hand, her own eyes misting at the edges. In Zoe's simple lines, she saw the mosaic of their journey, the late buses she'd caught with Zoe bundled on her hip, the nights she'd whispered strength into the dark after Marcus's photo grew dusty on the shelf, the quiet revolution of Ethan's presence showing up with grocery bags and goofy voices, not to fix her world, but to fold into it. As a black woman who'd navigated the subtle slights of a society that measured worth in zip codes and bank balances, she'd guarded her heart like a rare bloom. But Ethan had tended it with patience, his privilege humbled into partnership, his solitude softened by their light. He turned to her, then the world narrowing to the space between them, the chalk dust on his knee, the faint scent of her vanilla lotion mingling with crisp air. With deliberate care, he took her coffee cup and set it aside on the grass, his free hand finding hers, fingers interlacing with the sureness of roots seeking soil. "Amara," he said, his voice steady as the horizon green eyes holding hers with a vulnerability that stripped him bare. "Can I stay? For every late bus, every spilled juice, every day that feels too heavy to carry alone." Her breath caught a hitch that echoed the first raindrop of a storm, sudden, sacred. Tears spilled freely now, tracing paths down her cheeks. But they were the good kind, the ones that watered, what had been waiting to grow. She cupped his face, thumb brushing the faint stubble along his jaw, seeing in him not the man of headlines, but the boy who'd learned to build bridges from absence. "You've already stayed," she whispered, leaning in to press a kiss to his cheek, soft and sealing. "Through the mess, the madness, you've been home all along." Zoe, sensing the shift, like a change in the wind, leaped up with a whoop that scattered chalk dust like fairy powder. "Yay! Pancakes every Sunday, with chocolate chips and whipped cream towers." Her arms flung wide, encompassing them both in her joy. Ethan laughed, the sound rich and releasing, pulling them into a huddle, Zoe sandwiched between her small hands, clutching their shirts like lifelines. "Deal," he rumbled, voice thick with promise. "But only if you flip the first one. I've seen your dragon moves, you're a pro." As the festival swirled around them, other families chalking hopscotch grids, volunteers, calling for group photos. The three rose hands linked in a chain, unbroken. They walked home the long way, meandering past the corner store with its bins of fresh apples, and the old oak where Amara once carved her initials as a girl. The city thrummed its indifferent pulse buses, rumbling horns, bleating the distant wail of a siren. But in their orbit, the world felt complete, a closed circle of chosen hearts, stitched not by blood or circumstance, but by the deliberate grace of showing up. Love. Amara reflected as Zoe chattered about her next masterpiece didn't thunder in with grand gestures or diamond declarations. It arrived quietly in ramen bowls and restored handkerchiefs in chalk promises on fleeting sidewalks. It stayed because it chose to day after imperfect day, turning strangers into sanctuary. And in the golden slant of that October light, with Ethan's arm around her shoulders and Zoe's hand swinging in hers, she knew they'd chosen well. So here's to the families we find, not the ones we're given, the ones that bloom in the cracks of ordinary mornings. Share a story of your own chosen circle today. Let it remind someone that love in its truest form is always worth the walk home.